think a good picture is one that stays with you. I think a good picture is one that you can't forget. It's something that you maybe learn from, or somehow it changes you in a small way. It illuminates perhaps something about life. I think when I think of my favorite pictures, I think that they're little stories about life on this planet. So I think, again, a good picture is one that is memorable, one that you learn from, one that teaches you something. Or I think what differentiates, perhaps a master photographer from everybody else is maybe two things. One is we have a lot of training. I mean, you need to practice like anything, whether it's architecture, medicine, or painting, or ballet, or whatever. Then there's, I think, the good photographers have a very deep sense of observation and can see things and can almost get into sort of perhaps a meditative state where they're actually seeing interesting little details of life which other people might pass by. A lot of it has to do with practice and shooting over many years. I mean, of course, there's some people that are geniuses that are great almost immediately, but other people, most of us is a learning curve. I've been a documentary photographer for 35 years. Most of what I've done in my career has been telling stories, photo essays. I think the best pictures are ones that tell an entire story in that one photograph. It's possible to tell a story in 20 pictures. It's also possible to tell a great story in one picture. It's possible to tell a great story in each picture, which in the end has this accumulative effect of being a very powerful essay. When I think of some of the great essays of Henri Cartier-Bresson or Eugene Smith or Dorothea Lange, they had an essay of maybe 10 or 20 or 30 pictures, but many of the pictures were standalone images which were very evocative and poetic and wonderful just on their own. A classic reportage, often it's almost like making a film. You have a kind of an establishing shot, and then you kind of have medium shots, and then sometimes close-up shots. So, but I've always loved the photo essay and telling stories and pictures. I think, regarding the question about beautifying or romanticizing suffering and people like that, I think when you're in the field, when you're working, you're photographing in the way that you want to be true to yourself and how you see the world. I've never tried to beautify or romanticize. I think you just have to photograph the way that you feel and let the chips fall where they may. And if somebody views it as in this way or that way, you just have to bear the consequences, I guess. I don't know how well, I do what I do, and I don't try and second guess myself. I don't try and say to myself when I'm in the field, you have to do this, you have to do that. I think the most important thing is to tell the story, whether it's the tsunami or a drought or famine or war. You have to tell the story in the best way you possibly can. And we're all individual. We all have our own photographic personalities and our own style. And in the end of the day, it's your own voice and your own conscious and you have to live with what you do, and that's it. Color for me is the way the world actually is. I think I love black and white, and I photograph in black and white occasionally, but not very often. Black and white was has been more established because that's what people use for the first 100 and extra, years. But in fact, it's more natural, it's more normal to photograph the world in colors. So for me, I photograph the way the world really is. But black and white's fine too. I use a Nikon camera and I have a Hasselblad, depending on the situation and my mood. I'll use one of those two cameras. Well, I always take a book, and now I take an iPad with movies and different things, which I find essential. Even when I'm on a plane, it's a great way to pass the time to look at pictures and to look at movies. And otherwise, I'm a very minimal packer. I don't carry a few clothes, not so much camera equipment, and depending on where I'm going, if I'm going to a place like Tibet, I might take some food. But generally, I'm a very light packer. Everything fits into 1 or 2 suitcases. I switched over to digital, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. And I'm so happy, and so I think digital is such a great, I think digital is such a advantage. I think it's such a great benefit to the way we work, because you can evaluate, you can look at your picture, evaluate the composition, the light, the shape, everything, and then you can adjust if you have time. At the end of the day, you can also edit, and again, look at your work, evaluate exposure and sharpness and focus and all that sort of thing. I think I'm making better pictures now with digital than I ever did with film. Primarily because with digital, you can shoot in extremely low light, handheld. I mean, you could shoot in low light with film, but you couldn't stop action with in a very low light. You need a tripod or you need extra lights. But with digital, you can literally handhold and stop action. So that's a big advantage. All of my, I do all my own selection. I go through all of my pictures and I pick the ones that I think are the best and tell the best story and whatever we, evaluate. From the beginning of photography, we've burned and dodged, lightened and darkened, and that continues till today. You perhaps want to emphasize a particular area of the picture. You want to darken a particular part of the picture. But that, when I worked in the darkroom 30 years ago, that was exactly the same technique we used then. And of course, the advantage now is that you can reproduce that. I mean, I used to spend hours trying to get one good print, and it was kind of hit or miss. You were never really able to reproduce that. So sometimes you'd be up all night making prints. But now it's much easier with the computer. As far as how photojournalism or documentary photography has changed in recent years, I think the main criteria, I think the main spirit and the ethics are constant. I mean, first of all, if you're working for a newspaper, magazine, or whatever, you have to maintain a certain credibility. People have to be able to sort of trust your reporting. So that's constant. I think that as far as whether you have a style, I don't think that really matters. I think that the pictures, as a documentary photographer working for publication, you have to have you have to be truthful in your reporting, but whether it's stylistic or, I don't think that really matters. I think the only thing that matters is presenting the facts in the most simple and direct way. I think if the style gets into the way of telling the story, then that's a problem. Because journalism is about reporting what's happening in the world to the readership so that the readership can be informed about what's happening in their world. And that's the main thing. If it starts to get too fancy and too stylistic, then that's a problem. Now, if you're doing fine art photography or your own personal project, then that's perhaps a different matter. I don't think of myself as being particularly famous. I think I'm very grateful and happy to have a certain amount of recognition. But in the world of photography, I'm proud that my work has been recognized and appreciated. But, I don't think any photographer is truly famous. I mean, you talk about, famous football players and actors, they're famous. But I think that, I walk out the door from here and it takes me as long to get a cab or to get a reservation in a restaurant as anybody else. But again, I think that when you practice a craft or an art or as a documentary photographer, if people appreciate what you're doing, I think that's a great thing. I did a story for National Geographic in 1985, and on the cover of this story I did on the Afghan-Pakistan border was this Afghan refugee named Sharbat Gula. And as soon as that picture was published on the cover, in some ways it really changed my life in a slow, gradual way. But the picture over the years has gained a certain momentum and a certain interest and a recognition around the world, so that almost wherever I go, China or India or whatever, people know the picture and know the story about the picture. So I think that was kind of a pivotal point. It's become such an iconic photograph that it kind of follows me everywhere I go. And I promise you, a day doesn't pass that there's not a request or some information or something I have to do to deal with that picture. It's literally, it's every day of my life. But I'm grateful to have made the picture, and so I'm happy about that. I think fashion is great fun. I think of some of the work of Richard Avedon and some of the Irving Penn, and the way fashion photography can be anything you want it to be. I mean, it's a product, it's a kind of, you're trying to make an impression, you're trying to create a look, but there's no limits. And when I think of some of the seminal work of somebody like Irving Penn and people like that, they were making just mind-blowing pictures and thinking way outside the box, and in a way creating art in addition to doing their jobs. So I think that you have to think big, you have to be creative, you have to be imaginative. So fashion's wonderful, like other types of photography. My advice to a young photographer is two or three things. One is know the history of photography. If you want to be a photographer, you have to photograph. It sounds simple, but it's really true. If you want to write, if you want to be a writer, you have to write. If you want to be a photographer, you have to photograph. And the other thing is that, like any other craft or profession, or whether you're doing documentary photography or fine art photography, it takes a lot of time, a lot of discipline, a lot of work. I mean, it's joyful and it's fun, and I enjoy every minute of it. There's a certain dedication. It just doesn't happen automatically. So I think that, again, whether you're a dancer or an actor or architect or doctor. This all takes time and effort, and the photography is no different.